My name is Dave Menne. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
See if that gets Menne even more inspired.
I'm 8-2. Practice Muay Thai. And shoot wrestling.
This is one of the best fights I've seen.
This is phenomenal.
He's gonna fight till he just drops.
$60,000 US for the winner, Dave Menne!
Even the hardcores will struggle to remember the name of the first ever UFC middleweight champion, Dave Menne. Sure, he never had a defense, but that's true of many champions, and even a fair few of the other division's first champions. But we still remember a lot of them. And today, we're asking the question, why isn't he remembered? At a time when the UFC's middleweight division was only getting started, Zuffa and Dana White had just taken over the company, and all over the world, other promotions had fighters that were just as good, if not better, than the UFC. So was Dave Menne really the best fighter in the world when he held up the UFC title? Or was he the only guy who they could get to fight for it at the time? Well, before I wrote this story, I didn't know the answer to that question either. But come with me on a journey, because I promise you, his story is going to absolutely blow you away. This is a story of Dave Menne, the UFC's most forgotten champion. This story begins in Minnesota, somewhere you probably wouldn't immediately think of martial arts, more a ridiculous amount of beautiful lakes and scenery, but in the literal town of Forest Lake, Dave Menne was raised, finding his first martial art, like many in high school, wrestling.
And then I got into wrestling, and I wrestled into high school, state finals, team won state. I was recruited by the U and a few other places, and I ended up walking on in Iowa for a few years.
If you know anything about Iowa wrestlers, you're talking Ben Askren, Matt Hughes, who actually comes up later. Dave didn't do very well at Iowa, however. Turns out it was a pretty rough and competitive environment where he had his fair share of wins and losses, but he said ultimately he was never really that passionate or trained hard enough to even really want to get those wins.
First place I probably really started training was in New Mexico.
It's there he met one of the Dog brothers, Arlen Sanford. Salty Dog, they called this guy, and they were known for their full contact stick fighting. These guys even tried to get one of their Carly stick fights onto one of the early UFC events, but even that was apparently too much for them. Dave ended up staying with these guys for a while, and it kind of opened his eyes to an entirely new world of martial arts. While there, he also met some people who trained in jiu-jitsu, and that's when everything really changed. When he returned to Minnesota, he started to look for something different, something to really challenge himself. Now, I actually want to take you even further back for a second, right back to 1983, and a man who doesn't often get mentioned when it comes to legendary coaches, the Minnesotan native Greg Nelson. Nelson was one of the first Americans to receive a black belt, and he opened the Minnesotan Martial Arts Academy in 1992. Through the academy, it wasn't long until Dave met a real promoter, and in 1997, Menne was invited to compete in a one-night tournament, something that he'd get used to. He finished everyone in that first night and won the tournament, and then the next day he went and fought for the belt and won that as well.
Probably took my first fight 3 or 4 months into training. When I started competing in MMA, it was kind of like the Wild Wild West.
Fighting frequently was definitely something Dave and everyone was doing at the time, and just 2 weeks later he got invited to join a new promotion out of Iowa where he'd wrestled at college. Extreme Challenge is probably not a show you've heard of, but they had some future UFC stars and champs walk through its doors, and Menne was thrown right in at the deep end at 170 pounds into a tournament. Despite his really promising start, he ran into future UFC fighter Shoney Carter in the finals of this tournament, and that started a 3-fight losing streak. But by the time he got a rematch, it was for the EC World title.
It's a fight that's about 10 years ahead of its time when you watch.
Menne got cut bad, but that did not stop both men from putting on one hell of a fight.
I predominantly went through submissions, and Shoney wriggled out of them.
Almost immediately ran ran into another big problem, another future UFC contender, this one a champion, Matt Hughes. And having already wrestled at Iowa, he was under no delusions about what he was getting into.
I would say he was quite a bit more stacked than me or bigger than me. I had more experience. I had no intention to ever try to stop a takedown, whether I could have or not. My plan was to concentrate predominantly and only on submission and save my energy for that.
Hughes took the decision, and later that night in the finals of the tournament would go on to lose to Dennis Hallman for the first time. But at the next Extreme Challenge show, they put on another 8-man tournament with Dennis Hallman and Dave Menne at opposite ends of the bracket. But what do you know? Dennis Hallman loses in the first round to the undefeated Mike McClure, who Dave then goes on to absolutely smash about an hour later, and again wins another tournament. Just 1 month before this tournament, Pat Miletich had just lost in another promotion. The question of who was the best was a bit up in the air, and people wanted to find out who it was, and apparently no one wanted to know more than the Japanese and the promotion Shuto. And at their 10th anniversary show, they wanted some goddamn answers. So they stacked this card with the best 170-pounders on planet Earth in 1999. The guy who just beat Pat Miletich, Jotaro Nakao, was on the card. Matt Hughes went on to beat Akihiro Gono. Carlos Newton submitted Kenji Kawaguchi, and Dave Menne was going to fight Dennis Hallman. Now, it wasn't the most amazing fight, to be honest. Both guys kind of just neutralized each other's grappling, and Menne was given the decision. It did little to advance him in the conversation of being one of the best. He wasn't even getting phone calls from the UFC, let alone any kind of talk about getting a title shot. So Menne got back on the road. The Shuto event went down in May, and by August, he'd already won another 5 fights and got a call that put him back on everyone's radar, a chance to compete against Nakao, the man who had beaten the UFC champion Pat Miletich.
Nakao was kind of like a Shuto secret weapon.
I think he had wins over Yuki Kondo, Shina Aoki, Tony D'Souza, a few other people.
Dave ended up just controlling again most of the fight from top position until he heard that there was only 20 seconds left, and then decided to try and stop fans from leaving early. It was a good win for Dave, but immediately he was on to the next fight, once again back at Extreme Challenge for another one-night tournament.
This is probably the best tournament I've ever seen as far as the lightweight category. Hughes, and you got Clark. On my side of the bracket, we got Menne, and Dave Strasser's another real tough competitor.
By the way, he just called it lightweight, which might be a bit confusing. That's just what it's called back then. Welterweight is what people mean by today's designation. So anyway, first up at EC29 was Chris Lytle. Now, he's actually the guy whose podcast a lot of these audio clips have come from during this video. That being said, he was undefeated in the US, but yeah, Dave was out for blood and to make a statement.
A little smaller than me, tried to break him.
Kind of beat the piss out of each other, I thought. I mean, I had black eyes at the end, and somebody's like, man, I don't know if he didn't like you or something, but he was more aggressive than normal. He was trying to hurt you. So
Menne beat the hell out of him and was about to do enough to finally get on the UFC's radar against the next guy in the tournament, Laverne Clark. Going up against Dave in the finals, this guy was on a 6-fight winning streak. And with that win, Dave was going to the UFC. He was matched up with a crafty BJJ black belt in Fabiano Iha, and after almost getting submitted early, Dave turned up the pace. There was a lot of control time, but he put a beating on Iha.
Was one of the more relaxed I've ever been. Probably goes back to how many fights I had.
A unanimous decision win wasn't a bad way to get things started, but Dave would not get another chance to compete in that division in the UFC. And if he got a phone call or not, I don't blame him, because honestly, the offer to fight at the World Extreme Fighting 9 show looked even better. The card was stacked with Dean Thomas, Carlos Newton, Rich Franklin, Matt Hughes, and Dan Severn, and Dave was being given a shot at what was being called his first middleweight title, which in this case happened to be 175 pounds. Now, another massive name in this promotion was a Brazilian named Pele. This guy was a Vale Tudo and Muay Thai legend who at the time was 32-3 in MMA. More importantly, while Pat Miletich had sat cageside commentating at UFC 25, talking about being the UFC champion, he had just 2 months before lost to Pele in the WEF. It was again becoming unclear who the best welterweight in the world was.
What a spectacular move that. It's a good situation.
Well, Manet's looking for a knee bar here on Pele.
And there they go.
Dave beat Pele down and took the title from him. But again, despite becoming a world champion, Dave did not go back to the UFC. Instead, Menne turned his attention to competing in rings in Japan, and he entered the legendary 2000 King of Kings tournament. Now, this is a tournament you've probably heard me talk about before, but also probably never heard me mention that Dave Menne was in it. Why? Well, again, it kind of goes along with this video, right? He's just not remembered for any of this stuff. And Dave even won his first 2 fights and got a spot in the rings final with the likes of Nogueira, Randy Couture, Overeem, but then he got invited to something that honestly made me do a double take while researching this video. Just 2 weeks before the scheduled rings tournament final, Dave leaves to fly to Kuwait to take part in the Shidokan Jitsu Warriors War 1 tournament. But this is actually one of the more fascinating events in MMA history. The whole thing had been organized for the personal pleasure of Sheikh Jabbar al-Ahmad, the ruler of Kuwait, and the lineup was stacked.
We are all in the top 6 in the world. Matt Hughes, Carlos Newton, Pele, and me. I'm probably in like the 5 or 6 on the list. It was going to be a 185-pound tournament.
But it seemed like a lot of the Russian fighters on the card were overweight and nobody cared.
So Cream's probably 205, 210.
These guys went all out. They had John McCarthy as the referee. They even had freaking Bruce Buffer as the ring announcer. And don't forget, this was all going down in one night yet again. And I tell you, when the whole thing started, Dave was definitely not the favorite to win. And in the first round, you had Pele go out there and destroy Matt Hughes in devastating fashion.
Like, okay. That is it.
First up for Dave was future UFC champ Carlos Newton.
Newton going for the body lock. Who's that fence?
Oh,
nice knee to the face. Beautiful knees by Dave Menne.
You're going to see Newton start to pick it up. Oh, now he's rolled him over.
They're duking it out. Oh, nice high kick by Menne.
Dave then had to get past 2 more incredibly tough but basically unknown Dagestani competitors. Still though, again, Dave wouldn't be denied and he grinded out another decision, and then about 40 minutes later he had to fight another absolute monster.
12-0 from Dagestan, please welcome back Karamula Barkalev.
He looked pound for pound the best in the world, too, in my opinion, at that time.
I had to look this Barkalev dude up, and man, he's a crazy guy. Going into this tournament, guys like Miletich were calling him the scariest guy in the world. This guy grew up at judo boarding school in Dagestan, like Islam Makhachev, where he apparently was also a ruthless street fighter. But the stories of him at the Grappling World Championships are even more legendary. At the first ever inaugural Grappling World Championships in 1998, he made it all the way to the finale, but lost to Rodrigo Gracie after 30 minutes. He then came back the next year and won the championship in his division. But the year after that in 2000 is just a legendary story. He made it to the semi-finals and ran into Ricardo Arona. After a slap, these guys got into a scrap. Arona won on points, but Barkalev was an instructor and representative of a local sheik. The guy was so offended he called for his arrest, and Barkalev went to prison for a week. He was eventually deported. That was supposed to be his big break outside of Abu Dhabi. With all those credentials, undefeated at 12-0, and every win coming in the first round, he might as well have been a progenitor to Hamzat Chimaev. And moreover, he'd just beaten Pele half to death about 30 minutes earlier.
What can Pele do to get out of the... Oh, John McCarthy has stopped the fight.
Before starting this video, the question I wanted to answer was, did Dave Menne deserve to fight for the first UFC middleweight title? And after seeing him take on the absolute monster Barkalev, I'd have to say, yes.
Barkalev into the side here.
Okay, there it is. Down. Barkalev back up. Barkalev touches.
Oh, attempts a knee bar.
Go for it. He really wants to get out of this position because this is a very dangerous position. He can be stopped from this position.
When you thought I was about done,
this is the same position that Mark Coleman had Igor Vovchanchin in.
I'd come back and stuff it down their throat.
Oh, nice move by Menne.
Oh, look out. Push off. That was how he got out of that.
Dave Menne brawling his way in and getting a right hand in there.
I mean, this Iowa non-starter wrestler was out here taking down an ADCC champion.
There's the right hand.
Oh, nearly wore a kick to the head.
Both men were getting tired, but Dave would not stop coming.
Good right hand.
Barkalev hurt that time.
Menne's on him.
Oh!
This is one of the best fights I've seen in recent
This is phenomenal.
Yeah. He will not quit no matter what. He's going to fight till he just drops.
The judges have found the winner, Dave Menne!
Dave Menne had just won another championship belt and a $60,000 purse, which is just massive at the time. And Barkhalev, he never competed again in MMA. And to think honestly, if he had beaten Dave that night, he very well might have been the first Dagestani champion in the UFC. Perhaps we'd have had our eyes open to that style years earlier, even before Fedor in Pride. Either way, it was great that Dave had been invited. It was even more incredible that he'd won. But oh yeah, about that Rings 2000 King of Kings tournament? Well, the finals for that was in just 2 weeks.
I had 3 days, basically 3 days getting home, so the 8th to the 11th or 12th, and I flew out the 16th for a no-weight class tournament in Tokyo and fought on the 24th again. My ribs were subluxed in my hand. I couldn't close. The day of the fight with adrenaline, I was able to close my hand and fight.
Dave entered the one-night tournament, now his 11th, but I have to agree with him, there was no way he could have been 100% for this fight, let alone for the entire tournament. He still went to war with Kanehara in the first round.
そして右肩アーチがアーチですね。右の優勝おっとっととワンツー左から右踏みました。デイブ・メネグラウンドに引きずり込んできました。バックにうまく回り込んでいきました。右スマッシュから右ストレート。おっと右ラッパー右ラッパー。
Honestly, at this point in the video, if you aren't a Dave Menne fan, I don't think you like MMA. This guy was a fucking warrior. Now imagine doing all that, go into a judge's decision, and then you find out you're going to do some bonus rounds. Yep, I'm not making this shit up. This fight, guys, is perhaps one of the greatest you have never seen.
I fall, hit my ass, I immediately pop up and punch him, and I'm punching him, the ref breaks it. I just hit him. You can't call the fight. Probably shouldn't have been fighting anymore at that point anyways, because my hands fucked up, my hands are fucked up, and at this point I got to fight Nagaro.
Yeah, he was probably right about that. As badass as Manne's performance was, the rest of the tournament would have been brutal and against much bigger men. But at least in the eyes of the UFC, he'd done enough to fight for the first ever UFC middleweight championship 6 months later. But the question is, did he deserve his title shot? Or was it that maybe even the UFC was setting up his opponent, the undefeated Gil Castillo? The UFC may have wanted Nate Marquardt to fight Dave Menne at the time. I mean, Nate was the first ever American pancrase champion. It meant a lot back then. But he'd been booked to fight in the IFL in a title fight and lost all his credibility to Gil Castillo. So Gil automatically got that call. As an undefeated Cesar Gracie black belt with wins over Lions Den team members as well as the IFC and pancrase champion Scout, Gil looked like he could be the real deal for the UFC. But I really think that victory at Warriors War had proven he was the best 185er, or at least enough that UFC wanted to test that theory in this new weight class. I mean, let's not be idiots here. Bruce Buffer was there, John McCarthy was there. Do you think they weren't paying attention to who won that bloody tournament? Granted though, this was Zuffa's first year taking over the UFC. The weight class was already shallow as they launched it. It's possible that considering this was also the first MMA event sanctioned by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, the addition of the middleweight title may have just been, in part, to appease the commission. And just for the sake of clarity, weight classes up until this point were a bit more loose. Until this UFC 31 in 2001, they were totally different. The UFC only had 4 weight classes before: heavyweight, middleweight, lightweight, and bantamweight. But they wanted to add more weight classes, get rid of the wide gaps between the divisions. The problem next for Menne is, though, that despite showing up at UFC 33 and battling a hard-fought decision against Gil, his reign is perhaps the most forgotten in UFC history. I don't think it helped that UFC 33 was seen as one of the worst events of all time. All 3 title fights went 25 minutes. Now, although Dave did start that trend, his fight with Gil had some great moments.
I dominated the striking on the feet. I was able to nullify his jiu-jitsu game. It was hard fought, but I dominated.
But unfortunately for Menne, his title win in the UFC would be his last win in the promotion. Just a few months later, his first defense was against Murillo Bustamante. After everything we've seen, I honestly really wouldn't have expected Dave to lose this one, but Murillo put on a flawless performance.
Oh, right, catch him there.
Dave would be brought back to the UFC a few more times after that, but each time it was against the next up-and-coming star in the division, and he became a former UFC champion that they could put on their resume. Dave Menne sadly has been forgotten by most, even by someone like myself who's tried to watch every bit of MMA I can. It wasn't easy to go back through and watch his career, and honestly, I don't think he's gotten the credit he deserves.
I guess I want to be remembered as one of the pioneers of the sport. In the end, that's someone that never gave up on their dreams.
Dave Menne took every fight as often as he could, and he wasn't afraid to test himself against the best in the world. You can make up your own mind, but I believe he deserved to fight for the middleweight championship, and I believe he deserves to be properly remembered as one of the first champions ever. So Dave Menne, right? What a fucking legend. I thought this was going to be a bit of a gimmicky video, but it turned into one of my favorite videos of all time. Big shout out, of course, guys. Please give him a thank you in the comments down below. Follow him on social media, cooltome_, aka Luke Taylor, the boy. Of course, as well, shout out to all of the channel members out there. Really appreciate you guys and the support you give us. Where would we be without you guys, eh? Come on. All right, guys, with that being said, let me know down below if you have an idea for another one of these essays. I'm always open to doing a new one. Hope you enjoyed this one. There's a bunch in the bank, plenty more on the way. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.